In a land where golden dust glimmered like starlight sweeping across the sands, in a time when caravans of salt crossed the Sahara on the backs of camels, linking distant worlds, a mighty kingdom rose, almost forgotten by modern history, yet once legendary across continents. This is the story of the empire called Vagadu, known to Arabic geographers as Ghana. An empire fueled by gold, driven by trade, and defined by power far greater than most have imagined. Welcome to the hidden history of the forgotten empire of ancient Ghana. Centuries ago, before Europe's empires dominated world maps, the savanna belt of what is now southern Mauritania and western Mali was home to one of the West African world's first great powers. The people who would build this empire were the Soninke people, Mande-speaking, skilled in iron smelting, adept at trade, and rooted in a landscape that bridged desert and forest. The story begins in the early centuries CE, when villages along the Niger Bend began to flourish. According to oral tradition, a figure known as Dinga Cissé emerged as a unifier of the Soninke clans, forging the first foundations of what would become Ghana. As caravans traveled from the north with salt and goods from the forested south approached the Sahel, the Soninke found themselves in the middle of a vast network of exchange. They held iron, they held gold, but above all, they held control. Control of trade means control of wealth, and wealth means power. Imagine a dusty market town in the 8th century. Camel caravans arriving after weeks in the desert, their bells faint in the dawn. Traders from the Maghreb speak Arabic, Soninke clerks speak Mande. Gold dust changes hands for salt, cloth, horses. Somewhere on the savannah, a Soninke king watches over this world, calculating tribute, overseeing shipments, guarding secrets. Arabic geographers of the 9th and 10th centuries began to write of the land of gold, describing a rich kingdom far beyond the Sahara. The medieval writer Abu Ubaid al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century, recorded that in the capital city there were 12 mosques inhabited by Muslim merchants and a nearby royal town where the king's pagan court remained. Here is your first cliffhanger. How did a seemingly remote African state come to dominate trans-Saharan trade networks that echoed across the Mediterranean world? The empire's heart rested in the goldfields of Bambouk, Bouré, and other rich deposits south of the Sahara. Gold was the empire's currency, its crown jewel. The king claimed exclusive rights to gold nuggets, thereby leaving traders with only dust, thus controlling value and scarcity. At the same time, iron technology gave the Soninke an edge. Farming improved, enabling surplus. Weapons improved, enabling dominance over nearby groups. A thriving agricultural base underpinned the trade system. In the great capital of Kumbi Saleh, often simply called Kumbi, recorded by travelers, 2 towns stood side by side, one dominated by Muslim merchants and mosques, the other the king's domain, full of palaces, courtiers, and sacred groves. Al-Bakri describes sweet water wells irrigating fields, domed houses, and outside the king's court, thickets guarded from intrusion. The title Ghana itself likely means warrior king, reflecting the tradition of strong leadership. Some historians suggest the Soninke title was Wagadu, land of the Wagu people. Over time, Arabic sources applied Ghana to the whole polity. And here we pause for the next suspenseful question. What happens when wealth invites rivals and when trade routes shift beneath your feet? By the 10th and 11th centuries, the Empire of Ghana was at its peak. It spanned massive swaths of savanna, commanded tribute from lesser states, and its king was known far beyond Africa's interior. Arab geographers reported in awe of his wealth. Yet, within that glory lay internal fault lines. The religious duality between the traditional animist court of the king and the growing influence of Islam among merchants created tension. The Soninke kings generally did not convert, but tolerated Muslim communities within the commerce centers. Trade tax systems worked fine when routes ran smoothly, but the kingdom's prosperity depended on stability. Agricultural production, river flows, rainfall, all had to hold. As the Sahara edged southwards and climate patterns shifted, the empire's foundations began to wobble. The ruler known as Tunka Manin, R.C. 1062 to 1076, stands out in historical accounts. Al-Bakri records him as a lover of justice, favorable to Muslims, adorned in gold and ivory. He reigned during what is often considered the zenith of Ghana's power. And yet, his reign also marked beginnings of decline. The empire's rivals, the Berber Confederation of the Almoravids, stirred in the north. Trade detours were opening. Vassal states chafed under tribute. So here's the dramatic twist. Even as Ghana shone brightest, the seeds of its decline were being sown. The 11th and 12th centuries brought the storms. In 1076, the Almoravid leader Abu Bakr ibn Umar is said to have sacked Kumbi, though the historical record remains debated. What is clear, the almighty trade network was under pressure. Climatic changes were reducing agricultural yields, and new trade routes began to bypass Ghana. Meanwhile, subject peoples began to assert independence. The southern goldfields and the western coastal trade were moving away from the empire's orbit. The internal unity began to fray. Archaeological evidence now supports that the capital's population and area were large, but that growth also made the state vulnerable. When external shocks came, the system could not absorb them easily. In the 12th century, drought and desertification struck the Sahel. The Niger floods diminished, agricultural zones shrank, pasture lands declined. Ghana's economy, once booming, felt the squeeze. The empire did not fall overnight. It staggered. In the early 12th century, the rising Mali Empire under Sundiata Keita would eventually supersede it. By 1240, Ghana was subsumed, or its power effectively broken. And so we reach a second cliffhanger. What remains when an empire dissipates, when gold flows dry, when capitals fall silent? The Empire of Ghana may have vanished, but its legacy echoes in the heart of West Africa and beyond. Firstly, the modern nation of Ghana chose its name in 1957 as a symbolic link to the ancient kingdom of wealth and power, which itself was located further north. More importantly, The concept of trade-based wealth-driven statehood in West Africa begins with Ouagadougou. Later empires like Mali and Sonaré built on its foundation, but Ghana was the pioneer. In cultural memory, the Soninke have preserved the epic of Dinga Sisse. In archaeology, the great city of Kumbi Saleh gives hints of urban complexity in the 11th century. Thousands of years after its peak, researchers are still uncovering the layout of its dual cities, its mosques, its irrigated wells. The empire also challenges many Western misconceptions. The idea that sub-Saharan Africa lacked large states, lacked complexity, or was outside world trade is wrong. Ghana stood at the crossroads of African, Arab, and Mediterranean worlds. Scholars now emphasize that West Africa was far more interconnected, far more dynamic than often taught. Yet, despite its importance, much of Ghana rests in the shadow of better-known empires. Its stories remain hidden, and that makes them all the more compelling. What can a kingdom that faded 8 centuries ago teach us now? First, it reminds us that Africa's past is vast and deep. The gold-laden caravans, the bustling markets, the cosmopolitan capitals all show a continent integrated into global flows long before colonialism. Second, it teaches us about sustainability and fragility. An empire built on gold and trade dazzled, but even dazzled empires must adapt to change. Climate, trade shifts, internal cohesion, all these matter. Third, it invites us to listen differently, to archaeology, to oral tradition, to African voices. The history of Ouagadougou is partly hidden because sources are scarce, but the silence is itself part of the story. Finally, its story fosters curiosity. What other kingdoms rose and fell in the forest zones, the savanna, the desert margins? What other treasures lie beneath the sand, beneath the forgotten names? Imagine the caravan winding its way across Saharan dunes, arriving at a city of mud-brick houses that gleam in the sun, the clink of gold dust in a trader's pouch echoing in the courtyard of a palace, drums in the night summoning warriors to the fields of iron-making. That world exists not only in legend, it existed right here in Ouagadougou, the forgotten empire of ancient Ghana. So, the next time you hear of the land of gold, think not just of modern Ghana, but of the Soninke kings, the salt caravans, the empire that refused invisibility, even when history tried to look away. This was Ghana. This was history. This is the story we must remember.